Today's story is about Opus discovers a terrible secret about his marriage. Opus was an enormous shock when he watched his wife making love with another man. She had abandoned Opus's family and ran away with her lover. I hope you all enjoying this long story. Okay, let's go on to the story. Jim and I had just finished our day shift at the plant and we were driving back home together in my car. We always commuted together whenever our work shifts coincide. And this week, it was my turn to use my car. As soon as we left the plant, Jim asked me to stop at a pharmacy on our way back home so that he could have a prescription fill. His wife, Sally, had a band called, and the doctor had prescribed medication to get rid of her. Stubborn, cool. Since we were driving near the pharmacy where my wife Rachel was working, I decided that I was going to surprise Jim as well as my wife and stop there. During all those years that she had been working there, not once had I visited her at her place of work, so I figured that she was going to be very surprised to see me there today. I had never dared to visit her at the pharmacy since I didn't want her coworkers or her boss thinking that I was checking on her. Surprisingly, she also never once commented about that fact to me. She was working today and I knew that she was going to be surprised indeed to see me. She only worked there 2 days per week and I figured that it was time that I finally met her boss. After 6 years, Rachel and I had been married for 9 years now. Even though we were not rich, I was earning good money at the plant where I was working, and I preferred that my wife remained at home. But 2 years after we had been married, she claimed that she needed to get out of the house and she wanted to go on the work market, since it was also her wish to have a car of her own. She was soon able to convince me to agree to let her work a year or two, at least until she had paid for the car that she wanted to buy. So a week after we had agreed about her starting to work, she found a job at a pharmacy on the other side of town. Just over a year later, she gave birth to Sandy. Then, for the next 2 years, she became a stay-at-home mom. Later, when Sandy was older, she once again begged me to let her work, even if it was only a couple of days per week. She claimed that she had already phoned at the pharmacy where she had previously worked and Mr. Clarkson was ready to take her back, even if it was only 2 days per week. I finally agreed and she set things up with her mother so that she could take care of Sandy. On those days, she was working. She had now been working 2 days a week for Mr. Clarkson for over 3 years, and Sandy was now almost 6. And not once had I stepped inside her place of work. I parked in front of the pharmacy and Jim and I both went inside. It wasn't a huge place, but it had about everything one would expect to find in a pharmacy. There were 4 long aisles on each side of which were shelves loaded with everything from cough syrup to of all brands. Then completely at the back was the space where prescriptions were being filled. Of course, Jim and I immediately walked there, but instead of seeing Rachel there as I expected, there was only a middle-aged man behind the long counter. He took Jim's prescription and started working on it. I was about to introduce myself and ask him where my wife was, but since Jim was standing next to me, I didn't want him to know that I was ignorant about the fact she was not there. So I didn't say anything. While the pharmacist was busy filling the prescription, Jim slowly wandered further away, looking around at the different displays. That is when I decided to give a closer inspection to the back of the place. As soon as I looked over the counter behind the pharmacist, my eyes filled on a desk near the wall. On it rested a framed picture of a girl of about 7 or 8. The thing that struck me about the picture was the fact that the child on it looked so much like my Cindy that it was uncanny. She had the same long blonde hair and blue eyes. Even her smile was the same. I just stood there and as I examined the picture, I was shocked and amazed by the resemblance with my daughter. It was as if I was looking at how Cindy would look in a year or so. How was that possible? I asked myself. All of a sudden I couldn't help myself. And I asked the pharmacist, who was still busy counting pills, if the child in the picture was his daughter. No, I have only 2 boys at home. This is Kathy. She is the daughter of Mr. Clarkson. She is a lovely child, isn't she? Yes, she certainly is. I was simply too shocked to say anything, so I moved away, pretending to look for an item on the shelves on my left. But deep inside, I suddenly felt sick. I kept asking myself, how could this Kathy look so much like my own daughter? And where was my wife? I then had a very bad feeling. Deep inside, I suppose that I had a hint of a clue to the answers to both questions, but I wasn't ready to admit it to myself. All of a sudden I felt a strong need to get out of there. I walked toward Jim and I told him I was going to wait for him in the car while sitting there waiting for Jim. I began to think Santi looked nothing like Rachel, and she certainly had none of my facial features. Also, Rachel and I both had brown eyes and dark brown hair. Santi was blonde when she was a young child. All my friends kept making jokes about the color of her hair. Some were even asking me if I was ordering pizza often at my house or what was the hair color. The mailman. Of course, these were only friendly jokes, and I didn't let these remarks bother me. But now it all came back to haunt me. Was Santi really my daughter, or was she the daughter of Mr. Clarkson? The strange thing was that I had never once met or seen Carl Clarkson, so I didn't have a clue as to what he looked like, except for the fact that he had, color hair. Rachel had mentioned this to me a few times when Rachel and I were home later that evening. She noticed my quiet and pensive mood. She even asked me if there was something bothering me. Of course, I didn't tell her that I had stopped at her place of work that day or what was on my mind, but I certainly would have liked to learn where she was when I stopped there. But I kept my mouth shut about doubts. I knew I had to be carefully and not accuse her of something that might exist only in my imagination. More important still, I knew that I needed to get proof so as to confirm or infer my doubts about the parentage of my daughter. You see, it was extremely painful for me to even consider the possibility that my precious angel might not be my biological daughter. I loved my daughter more than anyone else in the world, and I would have walked through fire for her. I tried to convince myself that it was probably just a coincidence that the two girls looked so much alike. But deep inside, I experienced a growing suspicion that kept coming to the surface. Later that night, while I was in bed lying next to my wife, the full impact of the day's events finally hit me. If Sandy wasn't my daughter and if Carl Clarkson was her biological father, this implied that Rachel had been playing him from the very beginning when she first began working for him over 6 years earlier. I told myself that even today it was more than probable she was still continuing her affair with her lover. She had probably made me a fool during all those years. Each time she is returning home to me after having had played with her boss, she is probably secretly enjoying the knowledge that she had just for me, knowing, I suspect, nothing of her affair. Yes, I had already noticed. She always took a shower as soon as she came home, saying to me, "I have to remove the smell on me of the different chemicals that I am in contact with." I knew now that she was rushing into the showers as soon as she came home so she could remove all traces of her recent infidelity. The following day was Friday. Since Rachel wasn't working that day, I drove to her place of work after dropping Jim at his house. I now wanted to see Carl Clarkson's face to face, since he didn't know me and since I had never seen him before. I felt that it was time I finally had a look at him. After asking the woman behind the cash where Mr. Clarkson was, I was told that he had already gone home. But she added that Mr. Man, his assistant, could help me with my prescription. She pointed toward the back. I realized that she was indicating the same man that had filled Jim's prescription the previous day. I told her that I would come back on another day since I have personal business with Mr. Clarkson. She then dropped a bombshell on me by adding that I should make sure that I didn't come on a Tuesday or a Thursday afternoon, since he was never in the pharmacy at those times. Of course, I left without saying another word. I just nodded to indicate that I understood what the hell was going on here. I said myself as soon as I was sitting in my car. Rachel had been hired to assist Mr. Clarkson on those 2 days. She was there to count pills for him and to help him with the filling of prescriptions. At home, she always referred to him as Mr. Clarkson. And now I had just been told that on those 2 days of the week that she was working, he was taking the afternoon off. It just didn't make sense to me. What was Rachel doing on those afternoons? After all, she was supposed to be helping her boss. The previous afternoon, she was not there, but she was supposed to be working. Was she somewhere else with him after the birth of Sandy? I had been completely against her going back to work, but she kept insisting that she wanted this until I finally conceded. And now I had a very sour feeling about her job, and that child's picture that stood on the desk kept coming back into my mind to haunt me. In my mind, the wall of doubt about my wife's faithfulness was getting stronger all the time. Was she cheating on me with her boss, or was it only my overactive mind playing tricks on me? Update: OHP is trying to get proofs of her cheating. Let's see an update. What could he found that weekend at home with Rachel was the worst in my life. Every time I would look at her, I kept imagining her having play with her boss. Of course, I couldn't place a face on him since I didn't know what he looked like exactly. Deep inside, I felt that there was a good chance that Sandy was his daughter. Was he still playing my wife behind my back? Could she even be working on her second child with him? All those years she had been playing him, probably more often than I had. I now couldn't think of her without feeling my anger coming to the surface. I knew that from now on, each time I would look at her, I was going to experience the same frustration until I got proof of the contrary. Saturday morning, while she was still sleeping next to me, I quietly looked at her. She was a beautiful woman indeed, but the thought of what she was probably doing behind my back was discouraged me. We didn't talk at all until noon that day, and when the three of us were sitting around the table, I mostly talked to my daughter in bed that night. I woke her in the middle of the night to make love her. There was no kissing and no soft words, just straight playing. It was my way to seek revenge on her for giving to another man what was rightfully mine only. For some reason, Rachel never complained about the way I was treating her. That fact all by itself was telling me more than anything else she had something to hide and was trying to buy herself out of trouble by allowing me to have all the play I wanted with her. After all, I had no tangible proof yet that she had been cheating. I didn't even understand myself why I was acting this way. All I knew was that I had that strong urge to cause her pain. I suppose that her lack of protest from my treatment was mostly due to fear. But why should she fear me? Her husband? Unless, of course, she had something to hide. She just wanted my anger to be over with so that we could go on with our usual daily affairs at home. I could tell she was afraid of getting into a discussion with me. Afraid to discuss.